A veteran ranger was left chained in the middle of the desert, legs shattered, no water for 3 days, waiting to die. When a wild lion appeared from the sands, he thought the end had come, but instead of attacking, the lion lowered its head and bit through the iron shackles. This isn't a fairy tale. What brought millions to tears wasn't just what the lion did, but who he truly was, and the life debt he had carried silently for 4 years. In the vast and unforgiving stretch of the Namibian borderlands, the wind didn't whisper, it howled. It ripped through the jagged cliffs and dry ravines, carrying with it the scent of heat, iron, and something else, something bleeding. Somewhere in that canyon of stone and dust, a man lay chained to a weathered post, his uniform tattered, lips cracked, and boots heavy with dried blood. His name was Jonas Beckett. Once a decorated senior ranger known for his no-nonsense demeanor and his unwavering protection of wildlife, Jonas now hung between life and death in a canyon no GPS would mark. His eyes, sunburned and swollen, fluttered open beneath the harsh midday glare. He didn't know how long he'd been there. 2 days? 3? The only water he'd had was a few drops from morning dew on his sleeve. The pain in his leg was more vivid, a compound fracture, left untreated, pinned beneath chains dug into his skin. He remembered the moment it all turned. 3 days earlier, Jonas had intercepted a tip-off. An illegal mining syndicate had set up just beyond the border, gutting the land for lithium and rare earth minerals, resources worth billions on the black market. They weren't just tearing apart the earth, they were hunting lions, elephants, and even rhinos, stripping tusks and hides for underground trade. Jonas went in alone. He had always trusted his instincts more than radios. That was his first mistake. They caught him at dusk, 5 men with faces wrapped in cloth, rifles drawn, and dogs snapping at his heels. They didn't bother asking who he was. They already knew. They beat him down, shattered his leg with a pipe, and dragged him across rock and thorn like a sack of trash. Then they chained him to a ceremonial post, once used by native tribes to mark sacred ground. A final insult, then they vanished like ghosts, taking his radio, his ID, and any trace he had ever been there. Jonas Beckett was supposed to die quietly, but the land had other plans. By the 3rd day, the heat was no longer his enemy. It became his drug. His brain floated, his skin blistered, time blurred. He heard voices that weren't there. He saw people long dead. And then came the laughter, hyenas somewhere far off, moving closer. Not yet, but they would come. Once the sun set and the air cooled, and the smell of blood got strong enough, Jonas closed his eyes and prayed for water. Instead, he heard something worse, a footstep, heavy, purposeful. It wasn't the scrabble of scavengers or the sharp claws of a jackal. It was soft, weighted, too deliberate. He opened his eyes and froze. A lion stood 10 feet away, massive, broad-shouldered. His mane wasn't golden but scorched by dust, faintly gray at the tips, like ash. His muscles rippled with each breath, and his amber eyes didn't dart like a predator sizing up prey. They stayed fixed, staring, right at Jonas. Jonas's throat seized, not from fear, from disbelief. He tried to sit up, but the chains held him back. His wrists were bleeding, his heartbeat slowed, not with calm, but with surrender. He'd always thought he'd go out like this, in the wild, under the sun, on land he once called sacred, but not like this, not as food. The lion took a step forward. Jonas flinched. Another step. Still no growl, no baring of teeth, no pounce. Instead, the lion's eyes dropped to the chains. It crouched slowly, head tilting sideways. What are you doing? Jonas thought. No part of this made sense. His memory flashed with images from years past. Tranquilizers, field rescues, GPS collars, wounded animals in thorn traps, a certain lion cub, one with eyes too big for his head and a limp from a steel snare. But that was years ago, deep in the reserve, a place this lion shouldn't even know. The lion moved closer. Jonas held his breath. He whispered, hoarse and almost delirious, "Nuru!" The lion paused. The name, spoken like a ghost, lingered in the air between them. Of course it couldn't be. It had been too long. And cubs didn't survive out here, not without their mothers, not in this economy of predators, poachers, and parasites. Nuru had been just a trembling cub back then. Jonas had found him entangled in a wire snare, his leg mangled and spirit broken. Against protocol, he had refused to euthanize the animal, spent 2 days camping alone to clean the wounds and feed the lion milk-soaked meat. Nuru had vanished back into the wild, and Jonas never told a soul. But now in front of him stood a lion that looked like it remembered. The chains around Jonas's wrists shifted as the lion lowered its head again. Slowly it sniffed the metal, then let out a low, vibrating growl, not directed at Jonas, but at the iron biting into his skin. The lion's jaw opened wide, teeth met rust. The first bite came down like bolt cutters. Jonas's mind reeled. It wasn't just the pain or the absurdity or the dehydration. It was the realization that something impossible was happening, something that no training, no ranger school, no wildlife conservation article had ever prepared him for. He wasn't just being watched. He was being rescued. Above them, vultures circled. Below them, the desert waited. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching them both. Because deep in the crevice of rock, hidden behind a crag in the cliffside, a camcorder blinked red. Recording. Unbeknownst to Jonas, the poachers hadn't left entirely, and now their trap was springing shut again, this time with 2 lives in the crosshairs. But for now, Jonas didn't know. All he knew was that a lion was chewing through his chains, and he wasn't afraid anymore. The sound of metal scraping against teeth echoed through the canyon, sharp and wrong, like something the land itself rejected. Jonas Beckett lay still, hardly daring to breathe, as the lion worked with slow determination. Each pull of its jaw sent a vibration through the chains and into Jonas's bones. Pain flared along his wrists, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he was still alive. The lion paused and lifted its head. Its eyes met Jonas's again, steady and unblinking. Not the stare of a predator calculating distance and weakness, but something older, searching, remembering. Jonas swallowed. His mouth tasted of dust and blood. "Easy," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was speaking to, the lion or himself. "I won't move." The lion took a step back, then circled him once, broad paws patting softly over stone. Its body blocked the sun for a moment, casting a shadow that cooled Jonas's burning face. He noticed then the scar along the lion's hind leg, jagged, pale, unmistakable. A mark left by wire, by human hands. His chest tightened. 4 years ago, in a restricted wildlife corridor funded by a federal conservation grant, Jonas had found a cub screaming beneath a thorn tree. The snare had been cheap but effective, the kind used by amateurs chasing fast money in illegal wildlife trade. The cub's leg had been swollen, infected, nearly gone. Jonas remembered kneeling in the dirt, calculating risks the way some men calculate insurance premiums. One wrong move, and the mother could have killed him. One delay, and the cub would have died. He had cut the wire anyway. Back then, the cub had bitten the air in terror, eyes wild, body trembling. Jonas had spoken calmly for hours, cleaning the wound, applying antibiotics from a kit meant for emergencies. When it was over, the cub had limped into the brush without a sound. Jonas never followed. He believed in boundaries, in letting the wild stay wild. Now the past stood in front of him, fully grown and breathing. "Nuru," Jonas said again, the name barely louder than the wind. "You made it." The lion's ears flicked. It lowered its head, sniffed Jonas's shoulder, then returned to the chains with renewed focus. This time, it bit harder. Rust cracked, one link bent, then another. The sound was violent, but the lion remained controlled, precise. Each movement felt intentional, as if guided by memory rather than instinct. Jonas felt something inside him shift. Fear loosened its grip, replaced by a quiet, overwhelming awe. Years of training told him this shouldn't be happening. Wildlife didn't remember. Animals didn't repay debts. That was what the textbook said. That was what donors and policymakers liked to believe when they funded wildlife conservation programs and habitat restoration initiatives. Nature, they insisted, was simple. It wasn't. The chain around Jonas's right wrist snapped free with a sharp crack. His arm fell limply to his side. He gasped, more from shock than pain. The lion stepped back again, watching closely, as if gauging whether Jonas could move. "I'm okay," Jonas murmured, though he wasn't. His hand trembled violently. "You did good. I've got the rest." But the lion ignored him and went back to work. It clamped down on the remaining chain, braced its massive body, and pulled. The post groaned. Jonas felt the metal give. With one final wrench, the chain tore loose from the stone. Jonas collapsed forward, landing on his side in the dust. He cried out, a raw, broken sound he didn't recognize as his own. The pain in his leg was unbearable now, fully awake. But through it all, the lion remained close, standing over him like a shield. For a moment, neither moved. The canyon was silent except for Jonas's ragged breathing. Then the lion growled. Low. Warning. Jonas's head snapped up. His vision swam, but he followed the lion's gaze toward the ridge above. Somewhere beyond the rocks, a sound carried on the wind. Voices. Human voices. Faint, but real. The poachers. They hadn't gone far. Jonas's heart sank. He reached instinctively for his belt, then remembered it was gone. No radio, no weapon, no emergency medical evacuation coverage that could save him now. Just broken bone, open wounds, and a lion standing between him and armed men who wouldn't hesitate to finish what they'd started. The lion took a step forward, positioning itself squarely in front of Jonas. Its mane lifted slightly as it inhaled, body tense and ready. It wasn't afraid. Jonas felt a strange, painful gratitude well up inside his chest. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. "I won't forget what you've done. I swear it." The lion didn't look back. It stared into the rocks, listening. Somewhere above, a camcorder lens shifted, catching the light for just a second before disappearing again. Jonas didn't see it. All he knew was that the wild had chosen him, for better or worse, and that whatever came next would change everything he thought he understood about survival, loyalty, and the fragile line between man and beast. And as the voices drew closer, the lion let out a low, thunderous rumble that rolled through the canyon like a promise. 4 years earlier, the world felt heavier, but Jonas Beckett still carried it with quiet resolve. Back then, he was stronger in body, maybe a little sharper in mind, but something else lived behind his eyes, something that had been chipped away with each passing season in the field. He had already buried too many animals. He had stared into the eyes of wounded creatures and chosen the merciful end. He had done what the law expected. But not that day. That day he found the cub. It was barely alive, no larger than a shepherd dog. One paw caught in a snare meant for a smaller prey, its leg twisted at a grotesque angle. Flies had already begun to gather around the raw flesh. Every time the cub moved, it whimpered, a sound that wasn't wild or primal, but childlike, confused. It should have been a mercy kill. That was procedure. Pain like that couldn't be fixed. Infection was inevitable. But Jonas didn't reach for the rifle. He knelt. "Easy now," he whispered, as if the cub could understand English. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cub hissed weakly, tried to drag itself back, but it didn't have the strength. Jonas didn't move any closer. Not yet. He just watched. He waited. And then he opened his pack. Inside, not a tranquilizer, not yet, but a thermos. Water, clean and cool. He uncapped it and placed it on the ground between them. Then he backed away. The cub didn't move for nearly 2 minutes. But the thirst won. It limped forward, dragging its paw across the dust, and lowered its head to drink. Jonas waited until it was done. Then he reached for the morphine-loaded syringe. He spoke low and slow. "You're going to feel a pinch, then nothing." It took him nearly 45 minutes to get the dosage right, another hour to cut the wire. By the time the cub was asleep, the sun had already begun its descent. Jonas stayed there the entire night, alone, far from any signal tower, no backup. He built a fire. He ground antibiotics into meat paste. He used his own belt to make a splint. When the cub woke in the morning, it tried to bite him. Jonas didn't flinch. By day 3, it allowed him to touch its shoulder. By day 5, it ate from his hand. On day 6, Jonas named it. "Nuru," he had said, watching the cub gaze silently into the setting sun. "It means light, and you'll need all of it to survive out here." He didn't tell his superiors. He didn't log the incident. It was a violation of every regulation he'd sworn to follow as a federal conservation ranger. But when he looked at the cub, he didn't see paperwork. He saw a soul with no voice. Nuru vanished into the brush the next morning. No goodbye, just a silent glance, a flick of the tail. And he was gone. Jonas never expected to see him again. Now, back in the present, the memory washed over him like a fever dream as he leaned against the canyon wall. The chains were gone, thanks to Nuru's impossible intervention. But his leg was still broken. The pain came in waves. Nuru was lying a few feet away now, watching him, ears twitching at every movement in the distance. Jonas studied the creature, bigger than he remembered, taller than most wild males, with scars across the front leg, that leg, where the old wire had once nearly killed him. The fur around the scar grew darker than the rest, almost black. It wasn't just the size or the scar. It was the way Nuru looked at him. Not like prey, not like predator, like something in between. Jonas wasn't sure if his mind was playing tricks, but the lion's gaze felt familiar and protective. He whispered, "You remember me, don't you?" Nuru blinked, slowly, then turned his head at the exact moment a pebble skittered down the canyon wall. Jonas tensed. They weren't alone. Nuru stood instantly, his body low to the ground, muscles tight like a coiled spring. Jonas tried to rise, pain flooding every nerve, but his leg wouldn't hold. Then another sound. Voices, not English, harsh, clipped, angry. Jonas recognized the cadence. The poachers were back, and they weren't alone. At least 3 men, maybe 4. Footsteps crunched through the gravel above. A shadow moved along the ridge. One of them laughed. They'd seen the flare. Jonas reached for the flare gun again, but it was gone, fired back in Chapter 2, and now lying useless in the dirt. He had nothing, no radio, no signal, no weapon, just Nuru. And then came the strangest thing. Nuru stepped in front of him, not by accident, not out of instinct, but as a shield. The lion didn't move, didn't growl, just stood still, massive and immovable, staring up at the source of the sound. Jonas felt something rise in his chest, not fear, but something deeper. A sense that he wasn't the only one protecting something here. Somewhere above, a rifle bolt clicked, and in that instant, everything from 4 years ago came roaring back. The choice to save a cub, the decision that cost him a promotion, the secret he never told Amara, the life he tried to forget. Now it was all coming full circle. Jonas whispered, "Stay low, Nuru. Don't..." But Nuru didn't stay low. He moved, not away, but toward the sound, not with the reckless fury of an attack, but with purpose. Slow, measured, intimidating. His mane lifted in the breeze, eyes glowing like coals. And then came the gunshot. Jonas screamed, "No!" But the shot hadn't come from the poachers. It had come from the ridge behind them. Another voice yelled, "Drop it!" Then a second shot, this time into the air. Nuru stopped. Dust flew as a figure climbed down the rocks. Amara. She had come. The emergency alert flare hadn't been for nothing. She was breathing hard, sweat dripping down her face, sidearms still raised as the poachers on the ridge scrambled backward into retreat. She saw Jonas, saw the lion, and froze. Nuru turned his head. Their eyes met. And in that moment, time held its breath. No one moved. Not Jonas, not Amara, not Nuru. A lion, a man, and a woman stood in a triangle of dust and blood and memory, held together by something older than law, deeper than instinct. Trust, fragile but unbroken. And somehow, for reasons none of them could explain, it was enough. The silence that followed Amara's arrival was almost holy. Jonas Beckett, slumped against the canyon wall, could hardly process the image in front of him, his trusted junior ranger standing between him and armed poachers, and beside her, the massive lion that had just saved his life, now calmly staring her down. Amara's finger hovered near the trigger. Her chest rose and fell as the weight of the situation pressed into her from all sides. "Jonas?" She finally breathed, her voice cracking. "What in God's name is that?" He smiled weakly, voice dry. "That is Nuru." Amara didn't blink. "The cub?" Jonas nodded once. The tension in her arms didn't relax, but her aim dipped by half an inch. She scanned the cliff above. The poachers had disappeared for now, startled by gunfire, but their absence wouldn't last. They knew this terrain. They had eyes everywhere. Amara moved cautiously toward Jonas, her boots crunching through the gravel. Nuru didn't budge, not a muscle twitched. His eyes tracked her every move. Jonas held up a shaky hand. "It's okay. He won't hurt you." "I'm not worried about me," she said. "I'm worried about you. I trust him." Amara knelt beside Jonas. He looked worse up close. His leg was swollen twice its normal size. There was dried blood on his face and bruising around his ribs. "You're a damn idiot," she muttered, reaching into her vest for a trauma kit. "Yeah," he rasped, "but I make good friends." As she wrapped a pressure bandage around his leg, her voice dropped. "Jonas, we have to get out of here. Reinforcements are 2 hours out. We need to move now." "Can't walk," he said. She glanced at Nuru. "Can he carry you?" Jonas laughed, short and sharp. "He's a lion, Amara, not a horse." "Then we need a miracle." The canyon above rustled. Stones fell. Amara stood, gun raised again, but it wasn't the poachers this time. It was a drone. Small, silent, metallic. Its rotors buzzed low as it hovered, scanning the scene. A red light blinked underneath its shell. They were being watched again. Jonas's jaw clenched. "They're tracking us!" Amara fired, one clean shot. The drone dropped like a bird with broken wings. The moment of victory didn't last. A far-off voice screamed in anger, then echoed with orders in a foreign tongue. "They're coming back," Jonas said, and then the first shot rang out. Dust exploded from the rock near Amara's foot. She dove to the ground beside Jonas. "We're sitting ducks down here." The second bullet came closer, then a third. Nuru roared. It wasn't a roar of rage. It was a warning, a declaration. Jonas had heard that sound once before, years ago when Nuru was still young and scared but full of spirit. But this was different, deeper, sharper, ancient. Then the lion did something that froze Amara in place. He turned, walked directly to Jonas's side, lowered his head, and bit down on the chains still clinging to Jonas's ankle. Not the ropes, not the rags, the iron links. Jonas gasped as the pressure shifted. Nuru clamped, twisted, and pulled. One link cracked, then another. Amara watched in stunned silence. Nuru grunted and bit again, this time harder, bracing his massive paws into the dirt. The iron creaked, groaned, then split with a metallic snap. Jonas was free. The movement made his legs scream with pain, but for the first time in 3 days he could turn over, adjust, breathe. Amara stared, open-mouthed. Did he just... He did. Nuru stepped back, breathing hard. Blood from his gums trickled along his lower jaw, but his eyes remained calm. Then he looked up again. The wind shifted. Gunpowder. The poachers had circled. One yelled from behind the ridge. Another fired blindly down. Amara grabbed Jonas under the arms and started dragging him toward a nearby rock formation. We can't outrun them like this. I'm not leaving Nuru. I'm not asking for your permission. They made it 10 feet before a shadow passed overhead. Another drone. She didn't fire this time. Instead, Nuru lunged. In a blur of golden muscle and fury, he leapt 10 feet into the air and snapped the drone from the sky with one swipe. The pieces clattered around him, but that act had consequences. The poachers now knew exactly where they were, and they weren't playing anymore. 3 shadows crested the ridge, rifles raised. Amara ducked, firing 2 shots. One man fell, another retreated, but the third stayed. He had a shotgun. He fired. Jonas shouted a warning, but Nuru had already moved. The shot hit the stone beside them. Shrapnel scattered. Amara cried out and fell back, a gash on her temple. Nuru charged. No hesitation. No plan. Only instinct. Jonas watched as the lion covered 30 feet in 3 seconds, barreled into the man with the shotgun, and slammed him into the canyon wall. Dust rose, screams echoed. When it cleared, the man was gone, unconscious or dead. Nuru stood over the body, chest heaving, fur matted with blood, some of it his own. Amara crawled to Jonas's side. He saved us. Jonas nodded slowly. Again. From somewhere in the distance, sirens howled, faint but growing louder. Reinforcements. Nuru turned to Jonas. Their eyes met once more. There was no roar now, no movement, just understanding. Then Nuru looked toward the east, toward the open desert, and began to walk. Wait, Jonas called, voice shaking. Nuru paused, but he didn't return. He walked into the rising dust, disappearing with the same silence he had arrived with. Amara collapsed beside Jonas. Are you going to tell anyone about this? She asked. He looked up at the sky. Would you believe it if I did? She didn't answer, because some truths weren't meant for reports. Some stories never made it into headlines, or conservation grant proposals, or policy meetings on wildlife preservation and ecological tourism funding. Some stories belonged to the dust and to those who bled into it. And in the crack of a canyon and the shiver of heat waves, Jonas knew this would be one of them. By the time the sirens faded into the distance and the last drone lay in fragments beneath the dust, Amara had managed to lift Jonas to the partial cover of a narrow canyon wall. His leg was worse than before, swollen, feverish, and pulsing with infection. But for the moment, they were alive. And alone. The sun was dipping behind the ridge now, bleeding orange into the stone and throwing long shadows across the sand. The wind had picked up. It carried the scent of gunpowder, dried blood, and something else. Something older. The kind of silence that comes not with peace, but with the calm before another storm. Jonas leaned back, chest rising shallowly. You saw what he did, didn't you? Amara didn't respond immediately. Her hands were busy tightening the tourniquet above his knee, but her eyes flicked toward the empty horizon where Nuru had vanished. She shook her head slowly. I don't even know what I saw. Jonas forced a pained smile. That makes 2 of us. She finished tying the knot and sat beside him. Her cheek was bruised, her uniform torn, but her grip on the sidearm remained steady. "We need evac. You're not going to make it another night out here." "They'll be tracking us," he murmured. Amara knew he was right. The poachers weren't just opportunistic killers. This wasn't about ivory or pelts anymore. The operation Jonas had uncovered was part of a far more sophisticated ring, one tied to illicit mineral trade, black market animal trafficking, and even corporate-level corruption. The kind of thing that made people disappear. The kind of thing that turned federal investigations into cold cases. "They saw Nuru," Jonas added. "They won't let that go." Amara checked the ammo in her sidearm. "Then we move before they find us." She helped Jonas to his feet, slinging his arm over her shoulders. The movement made him wince, but he stayed upright. Together they began the slow shuffle down the canyon's edge, following the cracks in the stone that led eastward toward a dry riverbed and, if they were lucky, a ranger outpost 30 miles out. They didn't get far. The first shot came from nowhere. A puff of dust exploded inches from Amara's boots. They dropped instantly, hitting the ground hard. Jonas gritted his teeth against the flare of pain in his leg. Amara crawled to a nearby boulder, scanning the cliffs with her sidearm raised. Voices echoed. 3, maybe 4 men. Spreading out. Coordinated. They'd been tracked after all. Jonas pulled his knife from his boot, but his hand shook too badly to hold it steady. "We're not getting out of this," he muttered. "Yes, we are," Amara said, her voice suddenly too calm. Jonas turned to look at her and saw something that made his blood run cold. Her eyes weren't on the poachers. They were looking past him. Jonas turned. And there he was. Nuru. He stood at the base of the hill, framed by dust and twilight, his body silhouetted against the falling sun. His gait was slower than before, and his left shoulder was matted with blood. The wound from the shotgun blast earlier was still visible, raw and angry. But his eyes, they were the same. Focused, alert, protective. The poachers saw him at the same time. One shouted, another fired. The bullet kicked up sand near Nuru's front paw, but the lion didn't flinch. He moved forward, low and deliberate, eyes never leaving the men above. Jonas grabbed Amara's wrist. "Don't let him do this alone." "I can't stop him." And she was right. Nuru broke into a run. The ridge exploded into chaos, men shouting in different languages, muzzle flashes lighting the rocks. One man fell, screaming as Nuru's body slammed into him, sending him sprawling down the slope. Another tried to run. He didn't get far. Jonas watched through the dust, unable to move, unable to help. It was brutal, but it wasn't rage that drove Nuru. It was something cleaner, as if every muscle and instinct had been sharpened into a single, blinding point of purpose. But there were too many. From the other side of the canyon, 2 more men appeared. One of them carried something larger, a scoped hunting rifle. They weren't aiming at Nuru. They were aiming at Jonas. Amara saw it too. She raised her sidearm and fired twice. One bullet grazed a rock. The second hit home. The rifleman dropped. The last man ran. And just like that, it was over. The canyon fell still again. But the silence wasn't peaceful, because Nuru wasn't standing anymore. He was on the ground. Jonas tried to crawl, but Amara got there first. Nuru lay breathing heavily, his side rising and falling with difficulty. The wound on his shoulder had opened wider during the fight. Blood soaked the earth beneath him. Amara knelt. She didn't touch him at first, just looked into his eyes. He looked back. She whispered, "He came back for you." Jonas reached him, dragging his bad leg through the sand, gasping with every inch. He collapsed beside Nuru and laid a hand gently on the lion's mane. "I never thought I'd see you again," he said softly. "I didn't deserve to." Nuru didn't move, but his tail flicked once. It was enough. Amara opened her radio, finally able to get a signal on the ridge. "This is Ranger Amara Cole," she said. We need immediate medical evac. Coordinates transmitting now. Priority 1, 2 injured, and one non-human asset requiring medical assessment. The response came fast. Reinforcements were close. Jonas leaned in closer to Nuru. "You don't have to stay," he said. "But you did?" Nuru's breathing was slower now, but still steady. "You saved my life. Again, you're the only reason I'm not buried in this dust." He felt a warmth against his hand. Nuru's body, even battered, radiated heat like a furnace. A living, breathing monument to everything wild and sacred and misunderstood. Then, faint in the distance, rotor blades, helicopters, backup, help. Amara looked at Jonas. "They're coming." Jonas nodded. "He's earned it." They both looked down at Nuru. The lion's eyes were still open, still watching. And in that last sliver of sunlight before the night swallowed the canyon whole, Jonas Beckett knew one thing with absolute certainty. The world could sell its minerals. It could poison its rivers. It could burn its forests and erase entire species in the name of progress and economic growth. But it could not erase this moment, because in a canyon no one cared about, a wounded ranger and a scarred lion had stood together. And they had not backed down. The helicopters didn't land. They circled once, scanning the canyon floor, then veered east toward the outpost. The terrain was too unstable. Radio chatter confirmed what Jonas Beckett already feared. They'd have to move to a safer location for extraction. No airlift here, no miracle rope descent, no easy way out. They were 12 kilometers from the pickup point. On a good day, that would have been an hour's hike. For Jonas, with a leg that barely moved and a bloodstream humming with infection, it might as well have been 100. Amara slung his arm over her shoulders again, jaw tight. Her head was still bleeding from the grazing shot earlier, but she didn't mention it. She hadn't spoken much since the fight ended. Her eyes kept drifting to Nuru. The lion was walking again, limping, slow, but walking. Jonas couldn't understand how. His shoulder was torn open, his right side dragging with every step, but still. He stayed close, always ahead or behind, never beside. The sun was gone now. Darkness swallowed the desert, and with it came the cold. Deserts don't die slowly. They shut off. The heat disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. 1 minute, Jonas was sweating. The next, he was shivering so hard his teeth chattered. Amara pulled her jacket off and draped it over his shoulders. "We keep moving," she said, voice quiet. "Do we have time?" Jonas asked. "Maybe, if nothing else finds us first." That was always the truth no one liked to say. When night fell out here, the land became someone else's. The stars looked beautiful overhead, glittering and silent, but beneath them hyenas hunted. Jackals prowled, scorpions shifted through sand, and somewhere far off the deeper predators stirred. They pressed on. Jonas couldn't walk more than 30 steps without stopping. His breath came shallow. Amara spoke less and less. And Nuru moved like a ghost. Sometimes he disappeared entirely. Other times Jonas caught the shine of his eyes in the moonlight. He'd walk ahead, ears twitching at distant sounds, or double back, brushing lightly against Amara's arm before vanishing again. Jonas lost track of time. The pain blurred everything. Once he collapsed. Couldn't get up. Amara tried to lift him, but he waved her off. "I'll slow you down. Go ahead. Call for help." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to." "No." She didn't raise her voice, didn't shout, just planted her feet and stared. "You didn't leave him," she added, jerking her head toward the darkness where Nuru stood, silent. "So I'm not leaving you?" Jonas wanted to argue. Instead, he laughed. It hurt like hell. "You always were stubborn," he said. "I learned from the best." They rested for 10 minutes. Then Nuru moved again, and they followed. Hours passed. They crossed a dried riverbed, the stones slick with night dew. They passed skeletal trees, their branches creaking in the wind. Once a shape darted across the path ahead, small, fast, maybe a fox or a caracal. But Nuru didn't flinch. He only growled once. Jonas had never heard that tone before. Not a roar, not a threat, a warning. Something was following them. Amara spun, sidearm raised, but there was nothing there. Only the wind. Still, the sound had changed. No more insects, no more distant jackal cries. Just quiet. Too quiet. That was when the hyenas came. 3 of them at first, mangy, skeletal things, laughing low and sharp as they circled behind the group. Jonas tried to sit up. Amara moved in front of him. Nuru didn't wait. He stepped forward, placing himself between the humans and the pack. One of the hyenas lunged. Nuru met it midair. The fight was savage and short, fur and dust and blood. When the other 2 tried to flank, Nuru turned, snarled, and drove them back. Amara fired a warning shot. One scattered, the other vanished into the brush. Silence returned. Jonas looked at Nuru. The lion was shaking now. His front leg buckled slightly, but he stayed standing. "Why does he keep doing this?" Amara asked, voice tight. "Because that's what he does," Jonas said. "He doesn't run." "Neither do we." They kept moving. Around the next bend, Amara saw it first. Red marker lights from the outpost, dim and flickering, not close, but not far either. Jonas tried to sit straighter. "We might make it." Amara tightened her grip on his side. "We will?" They made it 2 more kilometers before Jonas collapsed again. This time he didn't move. His eyes rolled back. His body went limp. Amara checked his pulse, faint but steady. "Stay with me, old man," she whispered. Then she looked around. The canyon had narrowed, too steep to carry him alone. The signal beacon wouldn't work in the choke point. She had a choice. Go for help, or stay. But before she could decide, Nuru stepped forward. He looked at Jonas, then at Amara, then lay down beside Jonas, curling his body around him. Amara blinked. "What are you doing?" The lion didn't answer. He just stayed still, and Jonas's body, once shaking, began to settle. The warmth, the weight, the heartbeat beside him. Amara crouched beside them, tears in her eyes. For a long time she didn't say a word. Then, into the radio, she spoke. "This is Ranger Cole. We've got eyes on the station, 1 down, 1 conscious. And we've got a large injured animal assisting in stabilization." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, "Say again?" "You heard me," she said. "Send the damn team." She clicked the radio off. Jonas stirred. Amara touched his shoulder. "You're not dying tonight." He didn't speak, but his hand reached out, found Nuru's mane, gripped it, faintly, held on. Jonas Beckett woke to a sound he hadn't heard in days. Rotor blades slicing through morning air. Not the distant hum of surveillance drones, but the deep mechanical thump of a real chopper, coming in low. He blinked against the dusty light. Dawn had broken, painting the desert in layers of soft gold and rust. Everything hurt. His leg was on fire, his ribs ached, but he was alive and warm, not from the sun, from the lion pressed against his side. Nuru, still there, still breathing. Amara knelt nearby, eyes locked on the horizon, radio in hand. Her voice was calm but urgent as she guided the inbound team. "You'll see the marker flares near the river split. We're about 200 meters west of that. Canyons narrow, set down where the rock opens." Jonas groaned, shifting slightly. His hand still rested against Nuru's mane. Amara turned at the sound. "Hey," she said gently. "You're awake." He nodded once. "How long?" 5 hours. His eyes widened. He stayed? Amara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Naru lifted his head at the approaching noise. His ears twitched, muscles tensing slightly. But when he looked down at Jonas, something in him settled. Jonas whispered, "It's okay, boy. They're not the enemy." The helicopter crested the ridge, banking wide before hovering above a flat patch of desert rock. Dust spiraled in every direction, coating everything in fine red powder. Two medics dropped down with packs strapped to their backs. Behind them came armed rangers. Jonas recognized one of them from the old unit in Windhoek. Faces tight, weapons raised. They saw Naru and froze. "Hold your fire," Amara snapped into the radio. "Stand down. He's not a threat." One of the medics hesitated. "Ma'am, that's a lion." "He's also the reason your patient's still breathing," she said. "You want to argue, take it up with the chain of command. But get down here, now." Jonas coughed, trying to sit up. Naru shifted again, making room for him. The medics approached slowly. Eyes on the animal, hands steady. No sudden moves. Jonas chuckled softly. "If this ends up on a wildlife tourism brochure, they better at least get my good side." The lead medic knelt beside him. "We've got you, Ranger Beckett. Just stay still." They worked fast, stabilizing the leg, starting IV fluids, checking for internal bleeding. One of them leaned in, voice lowered. "Do you know the animal?" Jonas nodded. "Name's Naru." "He's hurt." "I know." Another ranger came forward, rifle still lowered, but ready. "We can sedate him if needed." Jonas's eyes narrowed. "You do that, and I'll get up and shoot you myself." The man blinked. "Understood." Behind them, Amara stood with her arms crossed, watching it all unfold. "Evac's ready," one of the medics called out. "We can load him up now." They brought a stretcher, but Jonas shook his head. "I'm not leaving him." "We can't transport a wild lion in the chopper." Jonas looked to Amara. "He walks." Her jaw tensed. "You sure?" "He got me this far." The rangers formed a perimeter as Jonas was helped to his feet, crutches secured under his arms. His body shook with the effort, but he didn't fall. And when they began the slow walk toward the helicopter, Naru followed. He walked just behind Jonas. Head low, movement slow, every step stiff from the wounds. But he stayed close. As they reached the clearing, the wind from the rotor kicked up another storm of dust. Jonas stopped just short of the ramp. Naru stopped too. Their eyes met one last time. The lion didn't blink, didn't look afraid, just certain. "This is where we part ways, isn't it?" Jonas whispered. Naru didn't answer. He just turned, slowly, deliberately, and began walking back the way they had come, toward the canyon, toward the wild, toward the place that still belonged to him. The medics helped Jonas onto the helicopter. Amara climbed in beside him. The moment they lifted off, he leaned to the window, watching until the lion's shape faded into the distance, one paw print at a time. Nobody spoke. The air inside the cabin was thick with silence and disbelief. Back at the base, the debrief was short and strange. The incident was marked as active investigation, but the footage recovered from the broken drone was grainy and incomplete. The poachers had vanished. No bodies, no weapons, just blood trails and sand. The only story left was the one Jonas refused to tell in full. He answered every question with care, gave just enough detail to keep his badge, left out just enough to keep Naru safe. When the supervisor asked if he needed a stress counselor, Jonas said no. When they asked if he remembered everything clearly, he said yes, but he didn't talk about the warmth on that final night, or the weight of a lion leaning against him, just enough to remind him he wasn't alone. Amara didn't talk much either. She just filed the report, then deleted the copy from her laptop. Weeks passed. The wound on Jonas's leg healed, though the limp remained. Some nights he heard phantom footsteps in his sleep, a heavy tread in sand, a breath at his back. And then, one morning, he returned to the canyon. Alone. No radio, No backup, just a flask of water and an old GPS. He climbed to the ridge, waited, and when the sun hit the rocks just right, he pulled a small silver tag from his jacket. The old ID chip from Nuru's cub collar, the one he had removed years ago and kept hidden in a drawer. He placed it on the stone, stepped back, and whispered, "Thank you." The wind carried the words down into the gorge. Jonas didn't wait for an answer. Some friendships don't need words. Some loyalty is older than law. And in the dust and wind of a forgotten canyon, Jonas Beckett remembered what most people forget, that in the wild nothing is promised. But sometimes something is returned. The canyon had changed. It always did over time. Wind shaped the stones, carved new lines into the cliffs, buried old paths under layers of silt and sand. But something about this return felt different to Jonas Beckett. It wasn't the landscape. It was him. His body still ached in cold weather. His leg throbbed when he walked too far. But that wasn't what had changed. It was the silence inside him. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. He stood on the same ridge where the helicopter had lifted him weeks ago. The wind carried the scent of distant rain, even though the sky above was clean and clear. Below, the dust swirled in small spirals, dancing along the trail where paw prints had once been. He wasn't in uniform today, no badge, no firearm, just jeans, an old ranger jacket, and a small cloth pouch clutched in his hand. The base had moved on. The poaching case had gone cold. No arrests, no further sightings. The mineral rights dispute had been absorbed into a web of legal jargon and quiet government settlements. Some lobbyists had started using phrases like sustainable extraction zones and ecological offsets. Jonas didn't bother to listen. Corporate sustainability reports never told the real story. They certainly didn't mention lions, especially not the one who saved his life. He stepped to the edge of the cliff and crouched low, brushing his fingers across the stone. He could almost see it, the moment Nuru stood here, tail still, eyes focused, waiting for them to catch up. A silent sentinel. The pouch in his hand was warm from the sun. He opened it and poured the contents into his palm. The silver tag, worn, scratched, barely legible. Nuru! He had removed it from the first collar, the one Jonas had hidden for years in a locked drawer. A lifetime ago, he had tagged the cub for tracking, part of a short-term conservation study that was never funded. He had removed it the day he let him go, knowing the world beyond would never understand what had happened. Now he didn't want it any more. He laid the tag on the stone, pressed his fingers to it once, then stood. Behind him, footsteps crunched. He turned. Amara approached slowly, a thermos in one hand, her other tucked into the pocket of a worn canvas vest. "I figured you'd be out here," she said. "You always did know how to find me." She handed him the thermos. Coffee, strong, real. He took a sip and sighed. "Tastes better than anything they serve in briefing rooms." "That's because I brewed it outside the system." He smiled. "That's why I trust you." They stood in silence for a moment, eyes on the valley below. "Any word?" she asked. "No sightings, no movement, nothing on satellite." Amara nodded. "You think he's still alive?" Jonas didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "Some hearts don't vanish. They just move where we can't follow." She glanced at the tag on the rock. "You're letting him go." "No," Jonas said softly. "He let me go." They stayed for a while, listening to the wind. It didn't speak, but it didn't need to. After a time, Amara asked, "So what happens now?" "I heal," Jonas said. "Maybe teach a few young rangers how not to be idiots in the field. Maybe plant a few more trees. Maybe disappear for a while." "Still won't file the full report?" He looked at her. "Would you?" She shook her head. "Not in a world like this." They smiled without humor. Below, a hawk cut across the canyon, its shadow slicing over stone. Amara broke the silence again. You know, they're talking about using AI-powered drones for conservation now, facial recognition for endangered species, geofencing to track animal behavior, even real-time threat alerts for poaching activity. Jonas snorted. Sounds expensive. It is, but it's where things are heading. Maybe. But the wild doesn't need a satellite. It needs someone who cares. She said nothing, just watched him. You still have that footage? He asked. Amara nodded. Delete it. I already did. He turned back to the valley. Then that's the last chapter. She started walking back to the truck parked beyond the ridge, but Jonas stayed just a few minutes longer. The wind picked up, and somewhere in it, for just a second, he thought he heard it again. A low, distant rumble, not thunder, a voice, a growl, a memory. He smiled, placed his hand on his heart, and whispered into the dust. I remember. Then he turned and walked away, the silver tag still glinting on the stone behind him. In a world that had forgotten what loyalty looked like, one lion had remembered. And one man would never forget.